Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final webinar for 2019. And what a big turnout we have for our final one of the year. So today, our resident K-12 guru, Mario Kart connoisseur, and the newest addition to the Priority Service team, and my desk neighbour, Paul Miller, will be working through the best design practices within Canvas. Central to this is something that I hold very dear to my heart as an ex-studio manager: death of tables. So before we start today, just some basic housekeeping. Please feel free to ask any questions via the chat menu, and we'll endeavour to get back to you as quickly as possible. We'll also be providing a recording of today's webinar, along with all our other webinars in our Canvas community space. Now, that's enough from me. I'd like to now pass on to Paul, and yeah, hope you enjoy the last one for 2019.
G'day everyone. A fair few of you probably know me already, but for those who don't, I'm Paul Miller. I've been with Instructure for just over 4.5 years now. Actually, that's on the next slide. This is about me. So I'm a customer success manager. Just to give you some context of what we're talking about today, I actually used to teach front-end web design at TAFE New South Wales in IT diploma courses. So just keep that in mind as we go through today. Just on how you might do things from a web perspective. It'll become pretty obvious as we go through the presentation, as I chat today, some of the things that will be really beneficial for you to know, given that context. Now, web design versus desktop publishing. I've had this conversation with a few of my clients before, but it's quite interesting as someone who has taught previously, and for people who do teach, you learn how to do desktop publishing. And when we do that, we're learning how to print to A4 basically. And we have a fixed size, A4 sheet of paper, and we learn how to put things in a way that they are in specific spots on the page, because that page does not change, it's A4. Even if we print a PDF, it's still A4, you know, Word document is always in A4. That's usually where our content normally comes from, unless it's some sort of slide presentation or something like that. So saving documents to PDF is not online publishing. It's just instead of printing in a physical form, you're printing the exact same layout in a digital form, and that's not what online publishing is. Online publishing gives you a lot more flexibility with the types of content you can add in, things like video and audio and interactive content. And the reason why I've got that last point bolded is because web content is consumed differently to printed content. The way that we look at it is totally different. And it actually is due to this. Once you start publishing things online, you don't have fixed sizes anymore. You don't have A4. You've got lots of different screen resolutions, lots of different screen sizes, and screen orientations. Some landscape, some portrait. It's all over the shop. So this leads into modern web design and how we've been able to respond to that. And that's something called responsive design. Now, I took a screenshot yesterday of the Sydney Morning Herald site on the left. This is a desktop view of the Sydney Morning Herald site, and on the right is a responsive layout of the Sydney Morning Herald site. It's the exact same stuff, same content, but you'll notice there's some big differences. The layout is totally different. That little image on the left-hand side becomes a big image on the right-hand side, and you can't even see that big Westpac image on the right-hand side. What's actually happened there is the content has become linear on the page. On a mobile device, we consume content in a linear fashion. We just start at the top and work our way down. And that's a really, really important point I'm going to be talking about a little bit more. But the way that things are placed on the page are not as important as the sequence of that content. I've got that in big bold caps on this page that you can see. It's way more important for your content to be in a certain order than it is to be in a specific place on the page. Because it will change. As you saw in that previous screen, stuff can move around, and that's okay. The way that you're going to consume it as someone working through that content is in that linear fashion. And it doesn't actually matter if something is right next to something else, so long as the order flows in a logical fashion. And that's really, really important. So what does it have to do with tables? Well, tables is not responsive design. I kind of say it there a little bit jokingly, but kind of not jokingly. Websites from the 90s use tables for layouts. And we haven't used tables for laying out things on the page in web design for many, many, many years. And so I completely understand why people would use tables, don't get me wrong, because you do want to have some sort of niceness to how things look, and you may want to lay things out a certain way. But that is a holdover from that desktop publishing kind of mentality. And we kind of need to overcome that, and that thinking needs to be changed, and that can be a little bit difficult. It's a bit of a mind shift, but I think it's really important. And it's important in your students' learning to know that it doesn't have to be in a specific place on the page for them to, it doesn't improve the learning process for it to be in a specific place on the page. It's more about the sequence on the page and having that logical order for the content. So many of you who do know me know that I'm a big Star Wars fan, and Yoda has some gold quotes throughout Star Wars, but I really, really like this one. You must unlearn what you've learned. When it comes to web design and online design and page layouts online, it's totally different to how we did things on desktop publishing, and so you need to unlearn that. So when you're designing for page layouts, you need to consider who your audience is. Is it just students? If you're a school, do you have parents that are coming into Canvas? If so, what devices are they using to come and view the content inside of Canvas? If you do have parents, are they even looking at the content? Are they just using the parent app? So it doesn't actually matter for the parents and what devices they're using. What devices are the teachers using, the instructors? This will affect your decisions as to how you might lay things out. If you're a school where everyone has the exact same device, or an institution where you've got a classroom and you've got a lab and people are consuming this in a lab, for example, and you've got every computer is exactly the same, and you know the screen resolution, you know how it's going to look because you're all using the same thing, then that actually gives you a little bit more structure to how you might do things, and will affect any decisions that you make with page layouts, because you can build to that particular specification. But if you don't know all the devices that people are going to use, then you need to think about, well, how might things change if people are using a mobile device or a tablet versus a desktop or laptop? So these are all things that we need to think about. So responsive design, you saw there on the Sydney Morning Herald site, that involves quite a bit of serious code. You can see on the left there, we've got some of this, an example of the very beginnings of some CSS to get things started with that, and then some JavaScript on the right-hand side. And there's actually quite a bit involved for making your websites responsive and making your page layouts responsive in Canvas. So let's take a deep dive into the code and look at those different elements and what you're going to have to learn to be able to do responsive design in Canvas. No, just kidding. We're not diving into the code.
I was about to say there was a few nervous people on this camera just where I'm looking at this. A few people shaking their heads going, this is not what I signed up for.
This is not what we're going to do. We are definitely not going to be doing that. Although I will give you one little snippet that a lot of people are going to really like. I'm going to talk about it at the end. It's not anything complex, but we're not going to dive into the code. We're going to cheat. We're going to do some things to kind of pseudo make our pages responsive, it's actually a lot simpler than you might be thinking. So let's talk into it. Let's dive into it, not talk into it. Let's do both. So accessibility, I'm I'm going to talk about this first, and this is actually really, really important. I'm going to be very serious for a second. Now, tables are not accessible. They just aren't. If you have someone who has a visual impairment and they use a screen reader to access your content online, it makes it really, really difficult for them if you're putting your content inside of a table. It makes it really hard. So from an equity standpoint, tables are not great for laying out your content for that one reason alone. Now, but not just that, people who are colorblind or have some issues with seeing colors properly, there are other considerations you need to take into account. One really cool thing is Canvas actually does have accessible fonts, for people with autism and other visual impairments. The font that we use inside of Canvas is actually tested to be really good for those sorts of things. So out of the box, Canvas is pretty good with that. There's also a lot of tools that you can use to make your content more accessible. I'm going to dive into some of those tools that will help you with this. So making your content digital actually makes it a lot more accessible if you do it properly. I used to give an example of how the Sydney Olympic Committee, there was a huge legal case which they lost because their website was not accessible. You don't want to head down those sorts of paths, but I won't go into that. That's from when I was teaching. Don't want to scare you too much. So what are some of the tools? We have an accessibility checker built into Canvas right out of the box. This tool is really powerful and really awesome. It does a good job of having a look at the stuff that you've got on your page and saying, here is something that's wrong, it's not accessible. And not only does it do that, it tells you how you can fix it. So it actually gives you suggestions and allows you to fill in some things and make some changes right there in the checker itself to fix that particular thing. It's really cool. And we also, as of this last weekend actually, there's a trial of Microsoft Immersive Reader on Pages in Canvas. You can flick that on your account feature options. Immersive Reader is really, really cool for, it's a Microsoft product. And you'll notice, by the way, everyone's going to get a copy of this presentation in a follow-up email. I've got these links down the bottom here of the guides that we have to how to use these tools. But yeah, the Microsoft Immersive Reader is really, really great from an accessibility standpoint. I won't dive into it too much. So how do people normally lay things out on pages? I'm going to focus a little bit heavily on home pages because that's where people tend to spend the most time as far as using tables is concerned for layouts, but also other areas of Canvas. And it's fairly common for people to use buttons or to create images that act as buttons to navigate to different parts of their course. And that's pretty cool, that's not a bad thing to do. And also to have a banner at the very top of the page of their home page, or even just pages in general. And that can make the page look quite nice. The Canvas Rich Content Editor makes it really, really easy to link those images and turn them into buttons, to link them to other parts of your course and make them clickable buttons that will take you through to those other parts. How many buttons you use on your home page? I'm going to give you a few examples in a second. It totally depends on what you're doing. So there's no golden rule for that. There's lots of different ways you can skin that. I'm going to show you canva.com, which is, I know a lot of you already use this. This is a fantastic tool that is really easy to use. It's free to use. There is some paid features that you can pay for if you want, but you can do a lot in it with just all the free stuff. I've never had to pay anything for anything I've done on canva.com. People sometimes confuse Canvas with Canva, yeah, it's a really, really cool tool. Icons. When you're laying out pages, you can use icons on your buttons. I'm going to show you some examples of that. But you can also use icons in your page layouts as an indicator of a particular thing that you want the student to do inside of Canvas. So it might be a reading activity or something like that. And you can have an icon that indicates that's what they're going to do. We have a fantastic school in Singapore that uses Canvas, and they use this quite heavily. All of the students at this school have autism. So you know, they have these visual cues for the students to help them to know what they're meant to be doing at that particular point in the content. There's a great website called icons8.com that has a whole heap of free icons that you can just download as images. And if you're into web development, stuff like that, you can download them as SVGs and all sorts of great stuff. All right, so let me jump out for a second. And I'm going to just bring up some examples of what this stuff actually looks like.
It's something we prepared earlier.
All right. So this is one example of a page that I built. Just forget about the actual content that's on the page. We're just looking at the layout of the page. So I've got a banner up the top. I've got some content in the middle with just some gobbledygook in there. And I've got some buttons that I'm going to use for navigation. Now, if I start to decrease my screen size, you can see what's happened there. Theoretically, when it catches up, those buttons have now stacked underneath each other. So as the screen resolutions change, which is what happens when you go to mobile, those buttons will just stack right underneath each other instead of turning into tiny little pins that you can't even see on the page. They'll just stack one underneath each other. Now, how have I done this? I've literally just created them as images on the page, and I haven't pressed enter when I've added the next button next to each other. I've just literally stacked them right next to each other as images. I'll show you really quickly how I do that in a second, but this is just to give you an idea. Here's another one. This is actually one of my favorite ones. You can see I had 2 rows of buttons. Now this is just a single row type of layout. And this is nice and simple, really, really easy, but it still looks really nice. These can still be buttons that link off to certain parts of your course. And then yet another page without tables. I've got a whole bunch of smaller buttons. Now, you'll notice here that it may actually be a little bit difficult to read where I've got the S where it says small. That could be an accessibility issue. So one thing to keep in mind is if you've got light text against a light background, that is bad. If you've got dark text against a dark background, that is bad. So you want light text against a darker background as far as accessibility is concerned. And you'll see, as I decrease the size of this screen, a similar thing happens. They start to stack down underneath each other. And it still looks all right. And they'll just continue to stack as I decrease it down even further. And the banner up the top, if I did have a banner, on a mobile device will actually shrink to the size of the screen just automatically. That'll just happen. That's built into how Canvas works. You can see I've got some icons there on the page. Just as an example of how you might use icons throughout your pages inside of Canvas. So how did I do this? I used a program that I mentioned earlier, Canva. And I'm signed in. You need to create an account on Canva. I'm already signed in. The banner that I created is actually 960 pixels wide. I've just chosen that as an arbitrary value because it's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 really easily. So you can, if you're thinking, well, I'm going to split up into lots of little small buttons underneath, you can divide it by however many that you want underneath that particular banner based on the width that you'll need to match up with 960. So you don't have to use 960. 1080 is also another good resolution, but if someone's got an older machine, then 1080 might be a little bit too wide. but 960 is really good for just dividing it up like that. So you can see that if I wanted to do 2, I would just divide it by 2 and make it 480 pixels wide. If I wanted to do it 3, then that would be 320 pixels wide. It's 960 divided by however many columns you want to create with those buttons for your default view, for the non-mobile view. And I can just go ahead and create a design. And this will open up the design screen in Canvas, in Canva. I'm going to make that mistake more than once, I think. And it's really, really easy to use. You can choose a background. You can have a solid color background. I might just do that for the sake of being quick. And what I'm going to show you is, this is the really, really important part. You probably don't want your buttons butting right up against each other. That doesn't really, you want a little bit of space in between them. So how do you do that? It's actually really, really easy. You don't have to use Canva, by the way. You can use Photoshop if you converse it in Photoshop or Pixlr, or like there's heaps of different tools you can use, but Canva's just nice and easy and free. I'm just going to add in this shape here, which is basically a square with nothing in the middle. It's just the outline of a square. And I'm going to place it on my image here. I'm just going to make this a bit smaller, or maybe not 75%, maybe 100%. And I'm going to drag this to the edges of my image so that I've got this as a border on the side of my image. This is much easier to do with a mouse than with a trackpad. All right, let's just line this up. There we go. For some reason, Canva has a weird thing where it does funky things on the side. They kind of extend beyond the canvas, but the tops and bottoms are fine. Now, I'm going to select my color here as white. And I've just created a white border around that image. If I zoom back in again, you can see I've got a white border now around this image. And that is what gives me my spacing between the buttons. So I've created that border, and I can do all sorts of really cool things now. So I can add in text. Let's just add in a heading. This is a button. I might title this and just say, yeah, it's 480, I think it's 480 by 100 pixels, so I know the dimensions, and I'm going to say button template. Now, I can move this around and it gives you nice, cool guides inside of Canva. I'm going to zoom back out again so I can see it a bit better. You can see some guides that appear, so I get it all centered really, really nicely. But I can also add in icons if I like. So I'm going to go to icons 8, and I'm going to search for button. I'm trying to combine a whole heap of things here all in one so that you can see what I'm trying to do. Now I'm going to select that first button. I can change the color, and let's make it, let's make this a light, really light gray, and I'm going to download that as a PNG file. And you can, it's got pre-filled sizes there. I'm actually going to make it slightly smaller. Let's make it 50 pixels. Actually, let's make it 30 pixels. I can download this. I'm just going to save it. And now I can add this into my Canva Just click on Uploads in Canva. Saved it in here, I think. There we go. And it adds it into my library. And I can add it in on the page here. All right, now that I'm happy with this button, I can download this. Just keep it as a PNG file, that's fine. And I'm going to save this as a template. And now I have this saved as a template in Canva, and I can create identical buttons and maybe just change the text, change the icon, and then download it again, and I've got another button. I just keep reusing the exact same template over and over again. And that's how you can do it really, really quickly, create some new buttons, and then you can add them into Canvas, which is what I did previously. So if I wanted to, I'll just show you really quickly how to add it into Canvas. Most of you should know how to add an image into Canvas. But you just click on the embed image, and I'm going to add it to my course files and upload it into there. Where are you? There we are. Oh, actually, no, not that one. Doing a different one. This one. And I'm going to update it. And there we go. We've added it into our page here. All right. So there are heaps of different tools. Now, if I go back to this page, I'm going to just do something really quickly to show you something. I'm just changing the zoom on my screen, and you'll see that I've got some text on the right here that's flowing past my banner and past my buttons, just with the content on the page. First thing I want to say is that's okay. You're allowed to do that. It's not going to affect your instructional design overly much, but I know some of you are going, in your heads, and you just want it all to line up in line with your banner and your buttons. And there is, I mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of code that you can use to do that. I'm going to show you that really quickly. So if you want to do that, you cannot do it without using a little bit of code. So I'm just going to grab that from my presentation, and I'm going to share this page with you. All right. So there's this tiny snippet of code. There's two little snippets that you'll need to grab. The start of what we call a div. A div is just a container. You're going to put all of your content in the page inside of a container. Divs are what are used to lay out pages in the modern web design world. As I've got there in bold and caps there, it is not required to do this. It doesn't enhance learning in any way, shape or form. It is purely aesthetic. You don't need to do this. But if you see that and you're just like, no, I can't live with that for any particular reason, then you need to grab this code. Now the max width part of this code is the width of the banners that you're using inside of your content, because you want it all to line up with those banners. So let me jump out and actually grab this code and show you how to put that into the page. I know we're pretty much out of time, but I'll do this real quick, and then we might go slightly over with some questions. I know there's a lot of content today. So I'm going to edit this page, and we're going into the scary HTML editor. And what we're doing is right up the very top, we're going to paste that first snippet, and then down the bottom, we're going to put that last snippet, which which closes off that container, that div. This is the start of the container, this is the end of the container. Now I'll save that. And then voila, the text is inside the container now. All right. So, here I've got, as we said, we'll send out this presentation and the recording of the webinar. I've got a whole bunch of resources there for you that we've talked about. If you do want to learn HTML and CSS, there's a website that has heaps of cool stuff on that called HTML Dog. It's a really interesting site, but it has really good resources on that. Yeah, are there any questions that we need to cover off before we finish up? Adam?
Sorry about that.
Muted, mate.
But yeah, welcome to me, Rookie World. We've just had a question there. Carlson's just asked, why do you add image into the course files? We do direct from the right-hand side images bar. Is this wrong?
No, either way works.
Yep, nothing like that.
No, it's not wrong. Either way works. Yeah, I was just doing that. Actually, the reason why I was doing that is because you won't have the sidebar shortly. With the new rich content editor, adding images will be via the image button. In the future, all of those buttons, all of the sidebars are going to be collapsed into the actual functional buttons in the rich content editor in the enhancements that are coming out shortly.